All right, the numbers seem to be steadying now as to the number attending. First of all, say, well, welcome to everybody to this first in our MRDCL Masterclass series, where we're running a masterclass every month or every 4 weeks for the next 6 months. And this is a two-part webinar, this one today. So we're going to cover half of the topic today and half in, I think it's in 4 weeks' time on the 22nd of May, I think, but you'll be getting an email and I'm sure we'll remind you that. It's on a Friday anyway. It's 4 weeks today on a Friday. So I'm Phil Hearn. I'm going to be your host for pretty much all of this session today. As usual on webinars, you'll find there's a Q&A box around your screen where you can type questions at any time. I've got Lauren with me who will give you 2 opportunities to have your questions answered. I'm going to do a PowerPoint session first of all, which will last 15 minutes or so, or 20 minutes. And in that session, if there's any questions at the end of that, I'll be happy to answer them there if they seem relevant. And then we're going to do some more practical stuff in the second half, and you may have some questions on what I've actually been demonstrating pretty much live in that, and I'll try and answer those. And there should be 10 minutes or so at the end for any questions that you have. So just to say, I'm Phil Hearn, and it's a very pleasant day here in the UK where I'm working from. It's about 20 degrees today, I think, which I know some people sitting around the world will think that's a cold day and will think that's a day for extra clothing, but I come from the United Kingdom where 20 degrees isn't bad really, particularly when it's still in April. All right, so on with this masterclass, and let's look at what we're covering today. As I say, this is the first of a 2-part webinar, so you're not going to have all your questions answered if you're keen to find out more about EPS. Today, we're going to look at the theory behind EPS and how you plan EPS, and we're going to look at what I call the simplest of the most complex examples of using EPS, and a practical one for using it. We're actually going to do that today. At the next session, we're going to get into a really complex, well, not really, but a fairly complex EPS script that we're actually going to do live. And we're also going to talk about implementing them across teams. So let's kick off this session. This session particularly, I think really is certainly appropriate both to people who are actually in data processing and people who manage data processing teams. So I think there's something in it for everybody here. The second half will be much more technical. So if you're a manager of a team, that might not be quite so interesting to you because it's actually how you do it rather than understanding when and why you do it. So let's get started. So I think it's important to understand the reasons why you should use EPS, first of all. It's a technique within the MRDCL tabulation software, and there's various good reasons for using it. And many of those, I think, and sometimes are just ignored, I think, are the business reasons. So there's some very good business reasons, which we're going to cover in a minute, why using EPS will be a good decision. Productivity is another important thing. Everybody wants to get their work done as fast as they reasonably can, and managers as well will want to have their staff doing things in efficient ways. And I think one of the things that I'd like to go over in these sessions is that many people who come to using MRDCL perhaps have had experience in another piece of software. That might be Quantum, it might be Merlin, it might be Uncle, it might be one or two others around the world that perhaps a similar, or SPSS, where there's some language involved, but none of those products have got anything like EPS. And there's a temptation, I think, for people who migrate to MRDCL to put it to one side and think, oh, I'll get onto that later, and I'll just do stuff using the scripting language, the standard scripting language in MRDCL. And EPS is like a sort of superior tool to it that lets you do things that can be much more efficiently handled, and we'll come to that in a second. It also lets you simplify common hurdles that you hit. And one of the things I've tried to encourage people over the years to say is, if there's something you find that's boring to do, difficult to do, easy to make mistakes in, perhaps look at doing it in EPS, because you'll probably find a better way, because what you can do with EPS, do all your thinking now and not have to worry about it in the future. We're going to cover in these sessions the planning and designing of templates, and we're going to look at that aspect of things today. We're looking at implementation more at the next session, and doing complex templates. We're going to look at the technical bit and making some EPS templates today. So we're going to see some real stuff going on. So EPS, what does it stand for? It stands for Excel Productivity Scripting. We named it when we put it into the software. It was a major development in our software, and the users that adopted it reported very quickly an improvement in productivity. On some projects, and I don't mean all projects here, but on some projects they actually made productivity gains of about 80%. In other words, it was taking a fifth of the time of what a project was before. And there was a classic project that I helped one of our clients with, where we converted a project from being just script only to using EPS, and the man hours needed on this tracking study to maintain it reduced from an amazing 30 days per month to about 1 to 1.5, 2 maximum. So a really huge productivity gain. And I accept that was a project that it really suited to it, but it made a huge difference. And we'll look at implementation a little bit more next week. So it's a way of using Excel templates to simplify things. And these can be things that sometimes are very easy, but just laborious to do. So when you're using MRDCL as a scripting language, you've got tools like do loops, which are really good to shorten the amount of code you have to write for something that's repetitive, like a rating scale or something like that. But they don't necessarily help if it's something that you want over and over again, either on the same project or on any number of projects that you run. And they don't, if you write something in a do loop, it's not something that may be shareable necessarily with a colleague or a colleague working in another country. So EPS is about developing little templates that others can use to make something more simple. So it's not just about looking after your own work, it's actually improving everybody else's productivity as well. Of course, they're really valuable for complex tasks, where suddenly something can become much easier if it's in a template. And actually, if I can refer back to that project that I did just now, the reason that was a complex project was not because it was particularly conceptually that difficult. The amount of code that had to be written to deal with the varying brands, sub-brands, and pricing schemes. It was in the mobile telephone sector that changed every week, became a huge burden for someone to turn all those codes into prices that changed every week or every month regularly into MRDCL script. And so what we did, we put everything into Excel spreadsheets so that somebody who knew nothing about market research data analysis could maintain all of the bits that were quite fiddly to put into MRDCL code. All the MRDCL scriptwriter had to do was just set a reference to a workbook and a worksheet and say how many weeks there were in the survey and what week we were on, and really basic things like that. Everything then was automatic. So problems like that or tasks like that suddenly become a non-MRDCL scriptwriter task. They just become a clerical task of somebody editing information in a spreadsheet and saying that for brand 1, sub-brand A, the price for that policy for a telephone contract for 1 year is $11 a month rather than what it was last month, $10.50, and everything is automatically then calculated on whatever month it happens to be on. So really powerful things that you can do to automate what you do. You also need to do, you also find EPS really works where you have something that nobody else wants. MRDCL is a general purpose scripting language for market research tabulations. I think it's the most efficient one out there, but there are things that you do that nobody or few other people in the world do. And so there's no special function in there to do whatever it is you want to do. And EPS means that you can program that to do what you want. So you can write your own template that does something that nobody else wants to do or few other people want to do. So that might be some proprietary scoring system that you have. It might be some calculation to do with brand share or brand awareness or whatever it might be. If you can program that into something in a template, you can just use that project to project, really easy ways. And we'll look at that very, very, very soon. So it's all about reusable templates and designing templates that do what you want. The benefits and the why you should use it become quite clear once you put your effort into it. Using EPS does require some effort. It takes some learning, it takes some effort to get into it and really understand the benefits of it. I think people who play at EPS don't get much from it and actually sort of quickly turn off it and don't really get the benefit out of it. You have to commit to it and say, okay, I'm going to put some effort into this, and I want the rewards back, obviously. It means you don't need to rethink tasks. Things like errors drop, that's something that everybody underestimates. I know I've often asked people, particularly I had a team of people doing data analysis for me a few years ago now, a few years back. I used to ask them how long they thought they spent correcting errors in their scripts and getting their tables right. So how long did they spend actually writing the initial script, how long they spent correcting it, and how long checking it. And I think nearly everyone underestimated the time they spent correcting errors and finding their errors. Using EPS, you will reduce your errors. I guarantee it. It also means you can share projects so that junior staff can do some of the rather mundane things that perhaps senior staff waste their time on. A lot of people who do script writing, a lot of the work that you do may be well beneath you. Your job might be that you're spending 80% of your time sometimes doing stuff that's very easy, and actually only 20% of the time doing stuff that's of the skill level that you actually have. And again, you can have people helping you if you template things and get them to do that sort of work, the easier work. They can be junior staff or whatever. I think one thing that I think is really important is that projects become much more open. I know when we get support inquiries, I like projects in EPS because I can work out what someone's doing straight away. And the same works within your own organization, that if you put stuff into Excel templates where it's not clear what's going on or it's complex, it's easy to pick up and read. So it's less difficult. There's less problems involved if someone leaves or if someone's ill, or of course, if that member of staff has just got 3 projects that have hit the same day and need some help. So I think, again, it keeps projects more open and easier to share and hand over and understand what's going on. And above all, it reduces costs. And I think someone famous said, although it's me actually, someone I wrote once was that, remember that DP people are used to surviving. People in DP are the world's best people at getting things done and working out ways to do things to survive, because what usually happens with people in DP is they're given a project to do, they're giving a timetable, and they've got to deliver correct tables by that date. And they get very good at dealing with what needs to be done to survive. With EPS, it comes down to the managers and the senior staff to look at why EPS can be a benefit to them. Do a cost benefit analysis. So I know there's a template which I'm going to share with you in a minute, or we're going to look at quite shortly, which handles nets or subtotals on open-ended code frames. I'm going to share that with you in just a couple of minutes. And let's say you've got 100 codes in a spreadsheet that have been used for an open-ended question. Let's say you've got 10 open-ended questions and a researcher wants those questions with some subtotals and nets. Now, that's not a particularly difficult thing to do, but it's very laborious unless the codes become consecutive codes, like they're 1 to 5 and then 6 to 10 and 11 to 20. But if the researcher says, I want code 1, 7, 9, 13, grouped together for a net, and then I want some other codes. And then you know what the researcher does. The researcher changes their mind and says, well, actually, can you put 1 and 6 together and not 1 and 7, or whatever it might be? You know what takes up time in DP. That can take a long time. It's not difficult. It's prone to error. It's very slow. If you do that sort of thing in quantum, it's quite a laborious task. If you do that through spreadsheets, actually, the researcher, rather than telling you what to do and wasting their time sending you an email telling you what to do, can do it themselves in the spreadsheet and send it to you. And you just plug that spreadsheet in and everyone gets what they want. So we're going to look at that example in a minute. And why I said cost benefit analysis there was maybe building that EPS template takes you 3 hours, let's say it's a really difficult one. That is a difficult one, actually. I think that took me about 2 hours to do when I built the template. And I suspect, given the fact I've shared that now with about 50 people or 50 companies around the world, I suspect that must have saved something like 100,000 hours now. I made that figure up, but it must be a huge number of hours for 2 hours investment. So other templates might be less than that, and they might take half an hour, but over the course of a year might save you time on 20 projects and might save 15 minutes each, but that's still a benefit. Before you start templates, I think it's important to work as a team. It's easy to just to get sort of stuck in and write your own ones and not share them. And then suddenly you've got 2 versions of a template that do similar things that have slight benefits, and one's not quite as good as the other. Share your ideas. When I've run workshops on templates, it's amazing how people start thinking about what would help, what extra feature would help them, so that you can all use then the same template if there's a team of you and get the same benefits. And then someone's responsible for developing them, someone's responsible for supporting them and documenting them, and then the other people just use them. Have a design strategy. I think it's important. When I make the most mistakes I've made over the years writing these templates, it's usually when I've gone into it without really thinking what I'm doing. I have done it, and we all make those mistakes. But try and think out how you're going to do it before you start. It sounds obvious, but it's an important thing to do. And of course, testing it thoroughly really does become an important thing. So when will EPS templates make a difference? Well, almost any type of task where there's repetition, complexity, or just something that's just fairly tedious to actually do. So there are any task that comes under those sort of pretty wide categories, and any sort of task within MRDCL itself. So that might be correcting data, reading data, defining types of variables. Defining tables tends to be a common way of using EPS. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, there'll be a good reason for it. So some examples before we get stuck in here. Tables from rating scales, a very common use of EPS, one of probably the most common. I remember running a workshop some time ago, and someone actually said we were looking at different types of tables that you might produce from rating scales. So you might produce a table for each statement by a banner. You might want to do a summary of the rating scales with them as columns. You might want a summary of them as rows. You might want a mean score summary. You might want a mean score summary that's ranked. You might want a table which is all the top 2 boxes down as the rows of the table. We sat at a workshop once, and I think we come up with 17 different tables that they've done at any time from rating scales. What we done in the next 3 hours, or 2.5, 3 hours, was program all those 17 variants into a template, so that they no longer had to think about what tables they produced from rating scales. They just checked off the tables that they wanted. And we actually have a template which I'll show you next week, or next time, sorry, not next week, in the next session, which does just that. So you can build templates that, again, you've done all the work up front. So 3 hours investment, I think that was at a workshop. I can't imagine how many hours it saved. There was a team of 10 people on that training course. I suspect they all use that template probably 20 times a year each, 200 uses. Let's say it saved them you know, a lot of hours for 3 hours work. Another use of templates, correcting data, fixing data. I quite like the fixing. I don't like permanently changing data that's been collected. I prefer to fix it within code, within my script, because you can then always go back to the original raw data. Doing that in a spreadsheet, in a template, means that you can have those corrections like an audit trail. So it's very easy to go back and see what people have changed over time with data. So correcting data is a really good use. Handling code lists, we mentioned, ranking code lists, producing tables with fussy layouts that you need. We're going to look at one of those today. Controlling your whole project, how it runs, what runs you do, and much more. I mean, there really isn't a limit here. So the first example I'm going to show you through a template, through PowerPoint rather, and then we'll get actually looking at some script for the rest of this session. So this is a very sort of traditional code list. It might be longer than this in most cases, but you can see here we've got 10 codes and 10 responses down to here. Ignore the ones at the bottom just for a minute. So we have 10 codes, and this might normally be 100 codes. So this is something that's very sort of standard that you might use as a way of your coders telling you how they've coded. And you might have some blanks in there. So code 8 wasn't used by the coders, so it just sits there as empty, and that's quite a common thing. Now, if you can convince your coding team to always use this template, and by this template, I mean they have the words code, text, group, subtotal, and merge at the top, and they number them possibly sequentially, but maybe not, that may not matter, but it makes sense to number them sequentially. You have got a template that you can use then to be shared for various purposes. And this particular template automatically calculates the nets on tables. So if we have an X here, that means that this is a subtotal, it's subtotal 1, and then all the codes that go into that subtotal can just take the same number, and when MRDCL reads it, it will automatically get me a subtotal with color of box that puts together all the ones with a 1 against them. 2s get their 2s grouped together, and 3s, and so on. And it does actually more than that, this particular template, in that it ranks the subtotals and the codes within it, so everything's totally is ranked within, if you like, the subtotals. So you could, for example, get the coders to do the first 2 columns, and then the researchers could put their own codes in here. And if they want to change it, it doesn't mean any work at all for the person in data processing. No work at all, which is how it should be, in my opinion, because data processing people, their skill is writing the scripts to read the information and produce the right tables. They're not the researchers that want to mess about with codes, but that's just my opinion. Also, this has got a little feature in there that somebody might later on decide that they want to merge this code in with code 5. So code 4 wants to get merged in with code 5. So we have a column here for merge. And again, when MRDCL reads this, it'll actually convert that. Now that's all so much easier than writing code that says, okay, the subtotal for color of box is 1 or 2 or 7. Then I want 1, 2, and 7 individually. Then I want 4 or 5 or 6. Oh, but I've got to merge code 4 in with 5 as well. So don't forget that. That becomes quite tedious script to write. Doing it here, much more open, much more easy to see, and anybody can do it. And all that the person in data processing has to do is enter those 2, is enter those 2 lines in red. So they would set a reference. They would say they want to look at the worksheet called reasons, the variable called Q1, and they want the title to be Q1 reasons, reasons of purchasing. And they got some other settings here as well. And then that calls in that piece of script that will read that workbook, the worksheet called reasons. We're assuming this sheet here is called reasons, and it will automatically do everything for you. That's it, just 2 lines of code, nothing else. So when you're building a system for productivity, you need to think that you need to sort of look at what it is it's going to do for you. It's going to improve your communications within your organization if you can work within these frameworks. And you can start to build systems to handle what you might call day-to-day tasks. And it means the right person is working on that particular project. So it really does make a difference. So let's look at a practical example. We're going to look at 3 different things today. The one we're going to look at in the most detail, I'm going to go back to that one about code lists, and I'm going to look at this one. This is the one we're going to work on in detail in a moment, and we're going to look at one other. So we're going to sort of set the scene today and look at the planning and actually do this one here. So this one here is something that a couple of people have come to me recently, different companies actually, rather interestingly, and this is how you do rim weighting in MRDCL. For those who don't know what rim weighting is, just a sort of very quick tutorial. It's like target weighting, except that rather than having the interlocking cells, you set targets for each variable that goes into it. They're called rims. So you might weight to 50-50 gender, male-female split. You might want to weight your 3 age groups to 30-30-40, and you might want to weight your region to north and south to 50-50 or something like that. So rim weighting is a technique that's used, if you're not familiar with it, like target weighting, but to weight independent variables effectively to get to targets that you want. Now that's the script in MRDCL that will weight gender to 50-50, age to 40-40-20, region to 30-30-40. Now, obviously you can just copy and paste that from project to project and it will work. But if you're like me, I tend to just key script, or I can't find it sometimes, and you start typing it away, and it is so easy to make errors in there. You'll forget one of these format options that you need. You might forget that you want 100 on the front of this. You might forget to put the percentage sign. You might forget you need that U. You might forget anything in here because it's not difficult, this code. It's quite easy to copy and paste it. And when you step through it, it makes sense to you. But it is a bit boring to have to do it every time and remember what you've got to do. And even if you just copied and paste it, editing all these things is again meaning you've got to go through the thought process of what you do. So here's an example of where EPS can actually be simplified into something that anybody can understand. Let's imagine now that rather than this, we've got 4 worksheets. The worksheet in the top corner here is called variables. It's got a heading called vars, and the variables I'm putting in are gender, age, and region. This is the worksheet gender. We've got 2 columns headed code and target. Code 1 we're making 50, code 2 we're making 50. Worksheet age, code and target, 1, 2, 3 codes, 40, 40, 20. Region, code and target, 1, 2, 3 codes, 30, 30, 40. If that's all you have to do, and you just need to type in 1 line of code to read all of that, that must be easier than having to copy paste that from another project, get it off the help menus, or retype it from scratch. Anybody can do this. Again, you could say to the researcher, just lay it out like this. Here's my Excel workbook. Make sure you've got a workbook with the worksheets called variables, and whatever you want to call whatever variables you want put into that rim weighting matrices, targets. All you got to do is learn to type them in that order there, any order actually there. Learn how to put code target 1, 2. I reckon you could train DP people are much smarter, of course, than researchers. We all know that. But you could probably train a researcher to use this within about 1.5 minutes, I would suspect. And they can send you this workbook If they miss something out or they make a mistake, it's still very easy for you to edit it and change it for them. If they misspelt the word target, it's not a problem. You can fix it very quickly. But it's an easy communication tool. It's very easy to understand, and no longer is rim weighting mysterious. It's now one line of code that you have to use, and you have a system for dealing with rim weighting. So let's look at some examples then in script terms now of how we approach this. I hope I've convinced you already that EPS is a good thing to do. So let's leave PowerPoint. So let's look at 3 projects that we're going to work on over the course of these 2 webinars. So the first one I showed you in the introduction, if you like, was one where we have coding handled in a spreadsheet. Here it is. It's not quite the same as the one I showed you in the PowerPoint, but it's an incredibly similar system. We've got 15 codes here. There are no missing codes in this particular case, but if a code was missing, it would work perfectly well. And then we've got some summary codes down here, which are indicated by the X. And we've got one code here where code 14 is being merged in with code 6 up here. Okay. Anybody can learn how to use that. Again, the training course to use that is probably somewhere between 30 seconds and 1.5 minutes. Now let's run my tables. Let's open up the script. Let's run my tables. And sure enough, what it's done, it's put the highest ranked item at the top. So that's the subtotal red any. That was the highest subtotal. It's rather confusingly got something wrongly coded in there, I expect. Advert shows blue has gone under the red subtotal. We can fix that. We can go over there. Advert shows blue has gone in with the 1 subtotal. It probably should have gone in with the 2 subtotal, which is any blue down here. So what a great chance to demonstrate how good this system is. I didn't do that on purpose, I promise you. So now that I put advert shows blue, we should find the blue any goes to the top of the table if I rerun it. I'm so glad I made that deliberate mistake. I didn't really do that, but here we go. Just proves we're live. I've run it again now, and you can see blue any's gone to the top of the table because I had that wrongly coded before, and inadvertently there I've managed to show you how this particular EPS template works, or what its benefit is. So that's a really good example a really good example of how you can use an EPS template to make something that's really laborious very, very easy. And at the end of the next session, we are going to offer a challenge with a prize if you can do something with this that's even better, but that comes at the end of the next session, so you'll have to stay tuned if you want to try and win that prize that we're offering. All right, so that's one example. I'm not showing you the script that runs that one because it's actually one of the more complex ones. Let's look at the next one here on the list, and we'll look at another example that we're going to be covering fully in the next session, but this is an interesting one. Just give my little... Okay, I hope that's all right for sound still. I had a little problem with my sound there. So this is something we're going to cover in the next session in absolute detail, but there are times where you want to have different things happening on a banner. So let's just run this and look, or just look at the tables here. So I've got some tables here where you can see this half of, or these columns of the tables are respondent based with percentages. These block of figures here are volumes, or volumetrics as people often call them, where it's not people anymore, it's the number of cans of a drink that they bought. And over here we've got a block of columns which are the mean scores, the average number of cans that each person bought. So dividing one by the other, effectively dividing that figure there by that figure there. So we're going to be looking at designing a template that does that, and again making it a bit more complicated. If we go to the last table in here, I think this one here is a little bit more complicated because it's showing you the respondents, number of respondents for males and females, the number of cans for males and females, but for males, females, and the age groups, and I think that's total there, overall, yeah, overall mean, it's giving you the mean scores. So basically there's some need here to produce different numbers, different things in different columns. Now, you can do all that through MRDCL script. I know you can. It's quite logical. You break the table into respondents. For that bit, you calculate that bit of the table. Then you'll do your quantity weighted bit here, and then you'll calculate your means over here. But if you want that on several projects, that takes time to do and time to check, and you'll make errors. So why not design a template that does just that? Let's look at that second one. It's a little bit shorter and easier to read. So again, a template's been designed where you can make the definition of what the column is there on your banner. Any headers that you want, you put here. Any texts that you want, you put here. And then if you want to weight a column by a variable, you put $cans in there, so that's weighting it by cans. If you want the mean score, you put it in the mean column, and if you want decimal places, you can specify that here. Now, you might not want decimal places, you might remove that. You might want to add another column in here to do significance testing. So you might have a column called sig test where you want this to be A and B, but you don't want significance tests on anything else, so you leave them blank. What we're coming to here really is that this concept, you need to think what you want to go into here before you start. So I've just thought here sig test would be quite a good thing. If we think we might want that in the future, it's probably a good idea to put it in now so that we've always got it. Even if I'm not going to use it on the project I'm going to use now, or I can't see it in the immediate future, it's probably as easy to program it in so it's always there. So thinking about what you want now and what you might need in the future is a really important thing, because then you can get these templates written and then you can just put them away somewhere, store them, and just call them when you need them, because that's the way they work. You set calls to them. The way what's going on in terms of programming is rather like a do loop. So it starts at the top and ends at the bottom. So you're setting effectively, when you read these worksheets, you're reading from the top and you're reading each of these rows. So you need to have your instructions in a logical order. So this is a really good example, the headers here. So what my script that reads this is doing, it's saying, okay, I'm going to the column called header. I'm going to see if there's something in there. If there is, I need to use it. If there's nothing there, I don't need to do anything. So we would need in our script a way of saying, if it's got something, use it. If there's nothing there, do nothing. Next column, next row, something in it, use it. Nothing in it, do nothing, and so on, all the way down. Arguably that should be in there, the overall mean text, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So thinking about what happens when you read this script is really important. So let's now go to the other example that we're going to work on today, which is the rim weighting example. So if we go to that workbook I showed you in PowerPoint just now, this is remarkably simple to understand. These are the variables I want in my rims. They're the figures for in each of the spreadsheets. really almost self-explanatory. It doesn't even need an info worksheet to teach people how to use it. It's self-explanatory. If somebody sent this to me in support and said it wasn't working, I could understand what they're trying to do instantly, because it's just so obvious what's going on. You'll note that there's not too many rules in EPS. Every column must have a heading, so you must give it a name. So I've called this one vars. You'll see in here we've got code and target, and that has to be the same for each one. Don't start thinking you can call this one region underscore code, region underscore target. Actually, you could, but you'll be just making it more difficult for yourself. Let's keep it nice and simple. So if we go back to that EPS script, that's the piece of script that I showed you at the beginning that done the rim weighting. That's the chunk of code there. It's not particularly difficult. I could spend the next 25 minutes going through this, teaching you that script so that you would remember it and be able to use it in future. The problem is, I suspect, even though you'd understand it, if you're a regular MRDCL user, remembering every little bit in there, I suspect you would forget something. So what we're going to do now is to convert this into some EPS script, because what this will do is we'll use the tools, or show you how to think about planning an EPS script and show you the tools you use. Now, I'll be the first to admit the tools you use are not the easiest tools to use. So going to learn EPS is another step up for people who haven't done it before. That's totally counterbalanced, in my opinion, from my experience of working with people who have embraced EPS, is that there's not many tools to learn. So it's quite a difficult learn at starting for the first time. Remember when perhaps you drove a car for the first time you hold a steering wheel, nothing seems to work very much as you would expect it to. It all seems a little bit different. Perhaps I'm a bit older. Perhaps people play computer games these days and they do know how to drive a car before they do it the first time. But the first time you drive a car, it seems very strange. EPS is a bit similar, but then if you've driven a car for any length of time, like I've driven a car for years, I hardly think about it. And EPS is a bit like that. It's perhaps not as extreme as that, but it is a bit like that, that once you've learned how to use about 5 tools and think when to use them appropriately, you've pretty much got it. And it's then just a case of applying that to tasks in the most thoughtful way. So we're going to try and convert this into EPS. I'm going to save this as something else. I don't want to ruin my original. So we're going to call this, what should we call it? We're going to call it webinar.stp. And as a piece of advice, my preferred way, and I know that not everybody works the same way when it comes to doing programming type tasks, the way I develop almost all my EPS scripts is to start with the longhand version and replace it gradually with the things that that drive it. So what I'm going to do now is gradually replace all this stuff in here with a template or script that will read my template and then be able to come out of this script and just be called in the code. We're all banking on me doing this right here in the next 15 minutes, so let's hope I don't make too many mistakes. Now, in this particular case, and it's the reason I'm doing this one first, because I've done a lot of the theory today, in the next session we'll go straight in pretty much into the script. But I've already designed my template here because actually this isn't a particularly difficult template to design. I'm just listing the variables here and I'm putting the codes and the targets here. So this is really almost as simple as it can be. There wasn't a lot of thought that went into this. Certainly when we look at the one the other one I looked at, where you're what I wanted to weight different columns by different things and do mean scores on different columns, there's a lot more planning there to make sure that you've got all the things in there. And I mentioned significance test as being one thing you might want to put in, but this is a pretty much clear task, so it's an easier one I think to start with. All right, so this is my workbook, rims.xlsx. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the work in this STP file for now, and then I'm going to remove it at the end. So the first thing I need to do is to open a workbook, and I'm going to call it DBR. So you give the workbook a name effectively. So this not opens it and it gives it the name DBR. You can call it what you like. You can call it A, you can call it Phil, AAA. Well, you probably won't call it Phil, but you know what I mean. You can call it any name you like. All right, so let's give it a name. Now, it's good practice to close that workbook when you finished with it. So this is the bit of code that I'm hoping to put into EPS. So it's just one. My goal here, I should have said this perhaps, I'm going to convert all that code there into one line of script that reads the workbook. That's my goal. I probably should have made that a bit clearer before I started. So I'm going to convert all this to one line of code. That's my plan. All right, so I've now got some code in that opens the workbook and closes it again, which of course is great, but actually doesn't do anything that I want. We need to go a little bit deeper into this and see what's going on. Now, if rim weighting is two-dimensional, in other words, we just had gender and age, we could just specify this as gender by age. But because tables by their very nature are two-dimensional, if there are more than two rims, I need to do a dot by dot to get gender within age so that I can convert the actual figures that I need to calculate into a two-dimensional table. So here I've got gender, age and region. So I'm doing a dot by dot on gender and age to get age within region and analyzing it by region to get my actual figures, because there's no such thing as a three-dimensional table that you can have. Tables are by their very nature rows and columns. So that's the first little challenge now, because I actually need to sort of think about what I'm going to do. I don't want a two-dimensional. I don't necessarily want to do a dot by dot variable if there's only two rims in there, because there's nothing to do a dot by dot by because if I do gender dot by dot nothing, it would error. So the first thing I need to do is actually know how many rims I've got. And I should say, if there were 5 rims in there, I would need to do dot by dot by dot by dot for 4 of them and just leave the last one here. So if I had gender, age, social class, and whether you're a user, and region as the 5th one, to go back to my list here, so I had 2 more on here, I would need to do a dot by dot of the first 4 and leave region on the end. All right, so the first thing I want to know is how many rims are there, because it affects what I'm going to do. And I'm going to use a function called dblines, which I'm going to say dblines is count rims dbr semicolon variables. Now what that line of code means is count the lines in the workbook called dbr. Remember, that's rims.xlsx. In the worksheet variables, this sheet here, in other words. So what that's going to store for me in the index called count rims is a value relating to the number of things in here. Now, a slight confusion here, but let's be clear about it. It will return the value 3 because it treats that as a header. So it'll say to me, there are 3 active rows in here. So although you see 4, the heading is one of them, it will return the value 3. People find that confusing, I know, but just get used to that one, I'm afraid. What it means is I can decide whether I want a dot by dot variable or not, depending on whether there's 2 or whether there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 rims. And what I can do then as a result of that is to have 2 bits of code. And this is a very common thing to do, to branch different ways depending on different things. So and this is actually how I develop my EPS scripts. So I'm going to branch and I'm going to say, if it's if count rims is equal to 2, skip this bit of code. If it's not equal to 2, skip this bit of code. Now I can get in there and I can define my variable called rim rows. So if we go back to the original script, rim rows was gender by age. So now I can say I want to put into my dot by dot everything except the last one. So if I've got gender, age and region, I just want to pick up gender and age. If I had gender, age, region and something else, I'd want to pick up gender, age and region and leave the something else as the columns. So let's go about doing that. Now you might think all you've got to do that is to say db loop, because that's the way we loop with EPS, dbr variables. I've just got to loop around the variables and I can call in db1.vars dot by dot. Now that sort of does some of the job but doesn't do all the job. So what this would do at the moment is it would say go round the variables and output db1.vars, which is that piece of text there, gender, age and region, and add after it dot by dot and carrying on doing that for each one. But that wouldn't be what I want, because what I would get out from that would be $gender, dot by dot, $age, dot by dot, $region, dot by dot with a comma on the end. So not only do I not want region on the end, I don't want the last dot by dot as well. So one of the techniques that you learn quite quickly and find really important is to set counters. So what I do is it's just my habit again, I set an index called got so that I can step it up each time round the loop and know how many times I've been around the loop. So if I put in here, so if I put that in there, every time I come to this, picking up the variable name that I want here, it will know whether that's the first one, the second one, or the third one, because got will take a value of 1 when I'm putting out gender, 2 when I'm putting out age, and 3 when I'm putting out region. All right, well, that's half the battle, but I also want to skip the last one because I don't want region, because look, region has to go on its own down here. So I'm going to say set count rims 2 is count rims minus 1. Now, there are other ways of doing this. I've done this in a way that's just a bit more easy to read. Now I know everything that's going on. I know when I want to stop with count rims 2, and I know I don't want dot by dot after I've got to a certain point. So let me put some code in to do that. So I want to skip over this variable. So I want to say here, skip 22 on got equal to count rim. So when I get to the last count rim, I don't want to put it out here at all. I want to skip over it. And we'll go to here. Also, I want to skip over the dot by dot on the last time round. So when, whoops, I also want to skip 22. I want to skip over, oh, I've got a P in there somehow. So I also want to skip over the dot by dot when got is equal to count rims 2. So I don't, and that should skip over it, the dot by dot. So I'm skipping over the last variable and I'm skipping over the dot by dot when I hit it for the last time. Let's check if that works. Let's just open up variable. I haven't got it open yet. Hang on. There it is. Got an error. Very good. I've redefined it. That's what it is. But there's my definition I've got coming out. I've missed off the dollars off the front, so I have made a mistake. I've missed off the dollars. It is a good idea to keep doing this as you go along. So I did a reasonably good job, but here, where are we? I missed off the dollar there. Yep, it looks as though it works. And so there's the line of code I'm putting out now. That's the line of code that was in the original script. Maybe I should put a little comment in there so you can see how I'm doing as I go through this. So all right, so I've dealt with that. Now, of course, when it's only two variables, it's a lot easier. I don't need a dot by dot. All I need to do is to call in the one variable. So here it's a lot simpler. If there's only two variables, I can say that rimrows equals, in fact, I can use a different technique here, can't I? Set got equals 0. And here I'm going to say that I only want the first variable when it's 2. And I can just call in db1.vars, comma, star 22, star db end, db1. So hopefully I've done that correctly now. I can't test that at the moment. I could remove one of those rims and just check. I suppose I can do that. Let's delete region temporarily and just check it works. It didn't work. What we got? Imrose.agenda starts here. What have I done wrong? 40 very. Oh, of course, I've got hard coded in there the region, which it knows nothing about. Okay. All right. Well, it doesn't matter because I haven't got that far yet, but it's an expected error. Okay, so we've got that all working now as far as the script goes here. It's erroring because of this line of code. Of course, is a redefinition in my original script. I should probably put a skip 99 around it so that it can't test it then. Okay, let's just carry on. All right, so the next challenge is, maybe I can just delete that. The next challenge is to do the tables. So I'm always analyzing rim rows, but the table I'm analyzing it by is always the last one, always the last one on the list of variables. I'm going to put region back in here now. I ought to save that before I do it. So we want to put region here. So I want to get the last variable on my list here. So I can do the same thing again. I can say star db loop db1 equals dbr semicolon variables. And the way that you can get the last one in the loop is to say that here that you want to start at a particular line in the spreadsheet. So whereas normally your loops start at row 2 for the first item, if you put a number in brackets, it will start at that particular row. So I want to start at I counted there's 3 of them, so I want to start at the 3rd row, and it will just loop round and do that one we've got there. So I can literally just say $db1.vars start db end db1, and it will pick the last one for me. All right, so we're doing okay now. We're getting the first things done. Now we can move to the tables that we want one for each of my rims. So what do I do here? Well, it's just another way of going around the table. So I'm going to set rim tab equal to 0. And I'm going to set a loop, star db loop db1 dbr, and I'm looping around variables yet again. And under here, I'm going to use another set command. I'm going to say rim tab is rim tab plus 1. So I'm adding 1 on, which means that I can just replace that with the text rim tab, or the index rim tab there. So that'll do V1. I won't need these anymore because these are just going to be part of my loop through the worksheet variables. And the variable I'm pulling in is db1.var. So that, oh sorry, vars, I think it is, vars. So that was pretty easy. Now I come to this table here. I've got exactly the same issue here that for my dummy table rim WT, I've got rim rows, that's all working, I've got that defined, but I need the same code again that I had here. So I'm literally going to copy and paste that, and that will pick the last one for me. All right, so we're getting now into the last bit of it now. I can now set rim tab back equal to 0 again. And again, I want to loop round that worksheet variables. You do find that you just loop round and round the same worksheets over and over again, but that doesn't matter. So that's where I'm going to end it. Now this time I want to set rim tab as rim tab plus 1. So I just number each, I step it up by 1 each time. And that will give me the value there. But now I want to always put 100 out because all my rims add to 100%. But now I want to go and get the values in each of the worksheets. And this is why that text there must match the name of the worksheet here. There is a good reason for it. You could have another column here that was a lookup column. You could say when you're doing gender, I want to use a worksheet called gender weights or something. And when I'm doing age weights, and use a lookup. But let's keep it nice and simple. The targets for gender are going to go in the gender sheet, for age go in the age, and region go in the region. So I need to be able to read this worksheet. The code actually is redundant. I'm not even using that. That's really there just to remind people what they're doing. It's this information that I want. And I'm going to need to loop round each of those worksheets, but I need to know when they're going to finish as well and how many lines in them. So I'm going to count the lines in each one. So we're going to use 2 techniques in one here. So this is a slightly trickier bit that we're going to do. I'm going to say that the number of lines, I'm going to call it count targets. I want to know in each worksheet how many there is. Now, if I typed in the word gender here, that would count me the number of rows there are in gender, again forgetting or discounting the header row. But of course I want to do it for each of the worksheets in my list, and this is where you can embed a DB loop in with another DB loop. So I can actually get it to count the number of rows in each of the worksheets one at a time. So this is going to first of all set count targets to 2 for gender, 3 for age, and 3 for region. So it's going to do a counter as it goes through each of these variables here. It's going to do set the value to 2, 3, and 3, I think I said. All right, so now when we get in here, we can actually go and grab the figures that we want. And what I can do here is I can say that I want to start DB loop DB2, because we're doing a loop within a loop here, just like you do A loops and B loops within A loops, or whatever names you use, is DBR DB1 dot vars, and I need another square bracket. I put that comma there, which was a mistake. All right, so now I can loop round in here to get the values. Now I can do the same thing here. I can set got equal to 0 before I go into the loop, and when I come out the loop, I can set got is got plus 1. You'll note that I'm reusing got. It's finished its use earlier up, so I can just carry on. And in here, I want to pull in that target, which is DB2, because it's coming from the gender worksheet now, or the age worksheet, or the region worksheet. And now it's going to loop through those values for me and drop them out there for me with a bracket comma on the end. But of course, I want a comma in here except for the last one. So this is where I want to say skip 22 on got equal to count target. So when I've got all my targets, I don't want the comma, I want to skip over it. But when I'm doing the first one, or the first and second one in the term for age and region, I want them, but I want to skip over it for the last one. I've actually thought of a better way of doing that as I'm demonstrating this, but let's stick to what we're doing now. And finally here, I should be closing I have closed my DBM1 loop. And hopefully that does the job for me. Finally, or nearly finally, I've got to do the same thing here with rim weight. I've got to pick up rim 1, 2, and 3. So this is actually very, very easy. I can say I want to do A equals 1 to count rims. So this is just an A loop, and I can replace that with A and end A. And this time I've been a bit cleverer, actually. I put the comma before it so that it'll all work, but I should have thought of that before, but I didn't. It would have made this line of code a bit simpler here. So I'm now just outputting rim V1, V2, V3. I'm nearly there. I'm getting there. So now I'm back to generating a variable that picks up all of the rims. And this time I do want them dot by dotted. So I'm going to call it rim.ext star db loop db1 is dbr semicolon variables. I want to set got equal to 0 again, because I want to know when to stop doing dot by dots. So I can say set got equals got plus 1. So as I say, this looks difficult, and it is difficult. I'm not trying to pretend it's not, but you see you're using the same techniques over and over again. You're just using gots to count where you are, using skips to skip over things. Pretty much the same techniques over and over again. We'll use one more technique next week when we do the complex thing. So that's an interesting thing, that it's more complicated next week, or next time, sorry, not next week, in 4 weeks' time, but it's only one more command we're going to learn. So in here, I want to put in $db1.vars, and I want to say skip 22 on got equals the count target, no, count rim, sorry. And in here, dot by dot, star 22, star dbn, db1, semicolon. And that line of code can go, and that line of code is fixed. Now, hopefully this all works. I almost guarantee I've made a mistake in here. Yes, I did. I've made an error at line 43. I'm not going to fight with this too hard. I have got one that already works. I've probably missed a line of code, just a dot or a comma out there in demonstrating it to you. I am going to cheat here. I am going to go to the one I prepared earlier that does work. It must have just one character in there that's different. But this is the same one that works. But look what I've done now to the final version. I've just replaced one line of code in here that does everything, because everything oops, I put 2 dots in there, that's why I didn't like it. So that's all pretty much what we done live just now. I made a line of code. I made an error in a line of code here somewhere. Probably something quite minor, I suspect, but it got as far as here before I made an error. But this is the one that actually works. It's all exactly the same. I think I might have made a slight difference in the way I approached it in 1 or 2 lines, but it's the same principle, using set, got, and all that sort of stuff. So we have got that, but what it means is now that all I need to apply rim weighting to a project is to type in insert rims.stp, have that file rims.stp in the directory, or if you work as a team, you might store that on Z:, or something like that, some shared area where you can all get to, but have that stored somewhere and teach somebody how to use this, which I think will probably take you about 1.5 minutes. And just to sort of show how flexible that is and how it works, let's run it so you can now relax a bit, because it all gets nice and easy now. So let's close that. Let's run this and let's see if it works. So here we are. Here's the unweighted figures: 9 males, 11 females, 7 young, 3 middle, 6 old, 776 for the regions. And then we come down to the weighted data down here. They're 50-50 for males, 40-40-20, 30-30-40 for region, and the users and not user, non-user is not targeted or not weighted. So that all appears to be working. And as they say in the best cookery demonstrations, if we open up rims now, I have got a sheet hidden here called user, where we also target users to 50-50. So if you spotted my tables there, at the moment users are 66-34, but let's say we want to include them in the rim, all you would have to do is to teach someone how to type the word user in there, make a worksheet called user, type those figures in, don't forget to save it, run it again, and now the unweighted figures will be the same. We get to the weighted figures, male still 50-50, the regions are still 40-40-20, sorry, the ages, I do apologize, and regions 30-30-40, and now with a drum roll, we come down to the users of the products, and it's now 50-50, and I think we have a working EPS template that anybody can use, which is simple and requires someone to understand how to use that worksheet and one line of code to do everything that before took all that horrible code. Now, clearly that's taken us about 45 minutes of this webinar to work through, but we can reuse that. That code in front of us there might have taken, let's say, 20 minutes to get right, 15 minutes to get right. We've spent 45 minutes, so we're running at a net loss of 30 minutes at the moment. But let's say that's shared amongst a team of 5 people and they use that 10 times each a year. That's 50 lots of 15 minutes against 45 minutes. So I don't think there's much argument as to what's the better way of doing it. So I'm going to stop there. In the next session in 4 weeks' time, we are going to look at a more complex challenge, and I'm also going to set a challenge where there's a prize available for anybody who gets back to us fastest with an EPS challenge. I'm happy to take any questions. I know I hope to get this done in an hour, this session. It's taken an hour and a quarter, so thank you for all sticking with me. If anyone's got any questions, I'll try and answer them very quickly in the next 5 minutes. If it makes sense to carry them over to next time, I'll carry them over to next time. So are there any questions, Lauren, that we have that have come in?
No questions.
No?
No.
Does that mean everyone's confused or everyone thought it was fantastic? I wonder. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. In the next session, just to sort of preview what that is so you know what you're getting in the next session. In the next session, we're going to look at that other task that I showed you. If I can go back.
Just a minute, Phil. I think Ramesh would like to ask a question.
Okay.
Ramesh, if you want to ask a question, if you type it in the Q&A box, and then I can ask Philip for you.
Okay, so while Ramesh is doing that, we'll just talk about what the next session is. So the next session, we're going to program this particular template where you want to have a mixture on a banner of some respondent data, some of it weighted by values. It could be different values, hasn't got to be the same value. Some mean scores on the table, on the banner as well, and different numbers of decimal places, perhaps with different columns. And even if we could even add in significance testing as a sort of extra feature as well. So we're going to, most of next session will be handling a slightly more challenging one. But again, same principles as today, nothing new really, same principles, but just applying it on something that perhaps needs a bit more planning up front. Today's was a fairly straightforward challenge in terms of conceptualizing it. This one needs a little bit more planning up front, but we'll do that in the next session. And then we'll also talk about implementation. So have we got a question now, Lauren?
Yeah, so it says, can we have scripts in nesting lines so that easy to understand skip loops, difficult to understand one-line scripting with skip and loop levels?
Yeah, one of the things that I did, I think what you're saying is, can you put comments in or put texts in to help? Yes, you can. I mean, it's one thing that I would recommend you do. I mean, I was going to do that next week or next. I keep saying next week. I mean next in 4 weeks' time, in the next session. It's a good idea to put comments in, because if you want to go back and edit these things, it becomes very difficult if you don't put comments in. So you can put comments in just like you can in any script to make it easier to debug them or add new features later on. The rim weighting one, I suppose, is one of those things that once you've got it working, you put it in a box and you store it away and never look at it again. Some of them, some templates that you build, you'll find extra features that you want to add as time goes on, or someone to say, wouldn't it be nice if you can add significance testing, to take my example just now. So yeah, I think it's a good idea to put comments and scripts in there.
Okay, that's it.
That's it. All right, well, thanks everyone for attending. We will be sending out the script to the rim weighting one out with the follow-up from this, but you'll get a full pack of stuff after the next session. And I hope you'll, the next session really is to push you and getting to think about how you approach things that are a bit more challenging and need a bit more thought, and we'll be working through that example as well. But there'll also, will be a challenge for you at the end of the next one, where we'll be offering you a prize as well. So thanks for attending. I'm sorry I overran by a little bit more than I thought. I'd hoped I'd fit this into an hour and 5 minutes at worst, but I didn't, and I hope you found it useful. Thanks for joining us.